Okay, so today you guys got exercise 124, and that means we're moving from AutoCAD into SketchUp. And so, as is the course in the semester, everything kind of speeds up. We have 4 weeks left until the final, so not a lot of time left. How many people have worked in SketchUp before? It's amazing, the answer to that question, right? So when I first started teaching this class 10 years ago, when I asked that question, maybe one person would raise their hand. And now SketchUp has kind of become universal. And I would argue that almost all of you already know how to use SketchUp. So instead of spending a bunch of time teaching you how to work in SketchUp, I'm going to assume that you know SketchUp and can work in SketchUp fairly comfortably. I'll show you a few tips along the way. But what we'll spend our time doing is creating good quality output from SketchUp. So we'll take our SketchUp file, and even today we'll take our SketchUp file, and before we post anything or show anything from SketchUp, we'll always take SketchUp and put it into Photoshop, tweak it, and then that'll be the final version. So this will be really a lot about Photoshop collage work on top of 3D modeling in SketchUp. Today we have to get our feet wet. We have to do something. It also gives me a chance to kind of see how everybody is at SketchUp, how comfortable they are, do I need any special instruction, etc. We're going to build the Francis Ching Cube House, which is on your little handout. If you were in 130, chances are you've seen this before. It's a good kind of modular building to work with. Your end product today doesn't have to look exactly like this. If you want to modify it and tweak it and make it your own, I'm perfectly happy with that. I'm going to split my lecture into 2 parts today. The first part, I'll talk a little bit about SketchUp and the interface because I always go through the software program first. Then I'll let you work for about an hour and a half, and then I'll stop you, and wherever you are, we'll start doing some Photoshop collage work. So we always are going to be bringing it back into Photoshop and working with it from there. So I'll show you that part of it in a little bit. But before we get started, I want to go over SketchUp. We should have a working copy of SketchUp 2017 on these computers. It was supposed to have been installed. We have an issue where our license expires right around this time of the year, and so it's a little iffy. 2016 and 2017 should work in this lab. The hope is that 2017 will work. When I opened 2017, there were some errors. We got to figure out what those errors are, but hopefully everything will work with 2017. SketchUp, the basic version is free for you to download and work at your leisure at home, which is a good thing. The version that is on the school computers here is the Pro version, which is pretty much identical. The difference is the export options. We have more flexibility in our export options from SketchUp Pro than we do in regular SketchUp. So that's kind of the default. So when I open a brand new SketchUp file, a couple things to point out. SketchUp loads by default a small tool set up here at the top of the most commonly used tools. Typically, I use what's called the large tool set. If you go to Tools, hold on a second. Excuse me, View, Toolbars, you can check the box for large tool set, which will put a tool set on the left side here that gives you a few more options. I like this tool set rather than the default Getting Started tool set, which is up at the top. Generally, I leave them both open. It doesn't really cause too much harm in your screen real estate. You have your primary working space right here. SketchUp always drops a person in for scale, which is actually kind of a good cue for your architectural work from here on out. It's always a good idea to have a person and to keep that person relevant so you have some understanding of scale. For right now, I am actually just going to delete it though. So I'll click on it and then press the delete key on the keyboard to make it go away. And then a couple things about SketchUp. Number one, this is a 3D working environment. It is also a 3D working environment that is in perspective by default. So we're looking at things in a perspective view. Our ground plane is along the red and the green axis, and our vertical is along the blue axis. We have a horizon line that's represented way out here in space. If we want to orbit around in our view, if you click and hold the scroll wheel on your mouse, you'll get the orbit tool, which will allow you to orbit around. And zooming in and zooming out is just scrolling in and scrolling out. On the right side here, we have a variety of little windows that can open. All of these windows are also available under the default tray. So if you go to Window, Default Tray, these are the ones that are checked. They're currently all available right here, which is perfect for us. For today, we're not really going to look at too much, but it's important to point out that we have the opportunity to put materials, put things on layers, think AutoCAD. We're going to control shadows and scenes a little bit today, and I'll show you those as we go forward. So now it's a matter of going ahead and starting to draw in the world of SketchUp. So a couple things to point out, and again, I think most of you already are comfortable with SketchUp, would feel comfortable drawing this little building, but I'm going to point out a couple things. Number one, when I use the rectangle tool, as I start to draw, there is a point at which there's a little diagonal line that happens. Okay, that means that the two sides, that one's a golden section. Let's see if I can get the square. Right there is the square. So that's useful to know that something is a square. But the other thing is, down in the lower right corner, you can see that it says dimensions. Right now it says 4'2", 4'2". Notice the coordinates kind of are like AutoCAD relative coordinates that we've worked on before. Because of that, I can actually type in 4 feet, 4 feet, and then hit enter, and I'll get a square that is 4 feet by 4 feet, which is very, very helpful. The other thing that I'd like to point out is, depending on where you place your little square here, let me do 4 feet again. Okay, that's still 4 feet by 4 feet, but notice that it looks really distorted. If I were to orbit around and look down on it, it's going to end up being a square. But that's one of the things that people struggle with in SketchUp initially, is that we know that this is a square, but this is also a square, but it doesn't look like a square. It has to do with the perspective view and the angle of the camera. So I like to point that out early. So now that I have this 4 foot by 4 foot square, I'd like to make it three-dimensional. I can do that using the Push-Pull Tool, which is available in both places, up at the top and down over here. It looks like a little rectangle with an arrow pointing straight up. If I click on that, I can then pull up the height of this little square. And again, I can use my distance measurement and type in 4 feet, like that. I can do the same thing here and type in 4 feet, and I get a 4 foot square there as well. If I wanted to move this, I'd use the black arrow, the selection tool. I'd select my object. I'd use the move tool, and I'd move from here to here. Now, one of the inherent problems with the world of SketchUp is that sometimes objects get sticky. Let me try moving that again. So if I move this object and I connect it to that object, and then I go to move it again, see how it's stuck to the first object? This is one of the problems in SketchUp. As soon as two objects connect together, they're now officially connected together. And so if we want to avoid that in the future, take one of the cubes here, we'll right-click on it, and we'll say Make Group. We'll do the same for this one. Right-click, Make Group. As soon as you've made it a group, it will not stick together or bond with a neighboring object. So now we can take these two and put them together, but if we wanted to move them, we can still separate them. So concentrate on that Make Group, because it'll make your life a lot easier. The other thing that happens is sometimes we want to make copies. And if we want to make copies, it's as simple as we can go to Edit, Copy, and then Edit, Paste. Notice I'm copying the group after I've created the group, and I can drop it into place. The other option would be to hold down the Control key while we have the Move tool selected, and you'll notice that the little cursor here gets a little plus sign next to it. That'll let you copy from a particular point, and we can continue. Oops, sorry, I have to press Control again. There we go. And we can keep copying out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. I'm doing the 8 cubes along the front of this building, and I need 2 cubes that pop out. So let me go ahead and select this and this. And once again, I'll use Move and then the Control key. I'm going to stick these over here so that I can get a better point, and there like that. So now if we look at this front little bit, and again, I'll let you do the bulk of the modeling here, but if I look at this front, I need to take these two pieces, and they're not actual cubes, they're divided into smaller pieces. So in order to do that, two things. One, I have to draw across the surface here. But when I draw a line across the surface, this is still a group, so it doesn't divide that surface just yet. In order to divide the surface, I need to right-click and say Explode. And now that line divides this into two different surfaces. I'll need to draw the line across the bottom from right there to right there. And now I can go through and delete these various pieces, including the curves. And I get that piece as well. What SketchUp does is whenever you, so in that case I divide the surface, I can delete this, oh let me ungroup, or excuse me, explode. Let me delete this. See how it hasn't created the surface in there just yet? As soon as I draw a line from here to here, assuming it's coplanar with the other lines, it will fill in with the surface for me. So then I can go ahead and I can delete those pieces, and now I have that little piece that pops out, much the same way that my drawing does here. I can do the same thing with the ramp here at the end, but before I do that, I'm going to take all of these and I'm going to make another copy. So let me use move. I'll use my control, and we'll copy, and we'll copy, and we'll copy. Oops. You want to be very careful to make sure that you use your snaps when you do the copies so that your pieces line up perfectly. The other thing that happens is people aren't careful when they do a copy, and suddenly, let me copy it. Two pieces end up close, but there's a little gap between them. That becomes a problem. So you really want to make sure that they're nice and tight. You're using those snaps to do it. So let me divide up this surface in front. Once again, in order to do any of these divisions, I do need to take these three, right-click, and say Explode. Then I can go ahead and I can draw a line that goes down the side like that, which will then allow me to delete this, this, and this. Now notice I still don't have a solid ramp coming across here, so I need to draw a line that goes from this point straight across to that edge. And then I need to draw a line that goes from here down to there, and that gives me the surface of the ramp. It also divides this surface to allow me to delete that. Get rid of these pieces. So I still need to draw a few more pieces. We can go from there to right there, and there to right there. And then I can get rid of a few more. Oops. So that was a good point. I mistakenly deleted something that I needed, one of these surfaces. If I draw a diagonal across this surface, I'll get the surface back. And then if I delete the curve, it will stay as its own surface. Sometimes you do get curves that are out of plane. So for example, if I drew a line down here, I have four curves, but they're not in the same plane. In order to make a surface, I would have to divide this either that way or that way. So sometimes you end up with a surface that just doesn't quite work, and that can happen. So what I want you to do today is I want you to continue on and build the rest of this. We'll take an hour and a half or so to do that, which gets us back to about 10 o'clock. At 10 o'clock, I'll take you through the process of exporting these files, dropping them into Photoshop, and then doing some enhancements on them there as well. Okay, so you have the next hour and a half to build as much of the building as you can. Again, if you want to modify this because you're bored with it, that's okay with me. I just want a nice quality building that's 8 cubes by 8 cubes by 8 cubes in maximum size. Make sense? All right. Okay, so as promised, It's a little after 10, and we're going to continue with the Photoshop part of this. So you should have gotten through part 1 and part 2, and looking around, it looks like most of you did, so that's good. Part 3 is really about Photoshop and how do we get different quality output than the traditional SketchUp looking file. And there is definitely a stigma in the architectural world against a SketchUp file. And this started a long time ago when SketchUp first came out, and it's kind of continued with it. And that is that when you go to present your architectural work, if it looks like SketchUp, when it's reviewed, generally it's thought of as basic. And so it's not as well received. That's changing a bit because of the post-processing that's available to us via Photoshop, which is what we'll do in this class, and via some of the renderers. I mean, Xray, the renderer that we use in the Rhino class, actually has a plugin for SketchUp. So you could render via Xray all the stuff that you could, just like you did in Rhino. So we're not going to do that. We're going to work through this building and just Photoshop. We'll go through a bunch of collage work. As we move forward into exercises that go forward, you'll be working again on that cabin that we worked on in assignment 105. You'll be working on that again in 106. And we'll be cutting views and doing plans and sections and elevations and that sort of thing from a 3D model. So we won't be working with the Francis Ching Cube House the whole time, but today is kind of our precursor to get ready. So the first thing that we need to do once we have our SketchUp file done is that sometimes it's useful to be able to go back to a particular scene over and over and over again. And so I have a tutorial written up on the course website. It's 4.5 scenes, and it walks through how do you save a scene for your particular view. And essentially what it involves is figuring out what looks right to you from a view standpoint. And we'll talk about a little bit later on in the semester how to establish a really nice looking view. Once you have a view that you like, let's say it's this one. And again, for today's purposes, it doesn't really matter what view you pick. But let's say it's this one. We're going to go through and we're actually going to save this scene. And so on the right side in the default tray, if we go to a little drawer for scenes, yours probably has just one scene in it. I've obviously done this exercise a few times, so I have a few saved views. If we click on the little plus sign right here, this will save the view. It's currently called Scene 5. If we scroll to the bottom of this, I thought we could rename it. Rename scene. Here we go. And so we could call this perspective or something that would be noticeable. And you can see now that it shows up as one of the tabs across the top here. I have a few other scenes that I've saved from before. I have a perspective render. I have a scene 3. I have a scene 4. They're just variations on the same thing. We're going to work with the perspective house render today. But however you choose to make your building is up to you. So now that I have this established, I want to start going through and saving a variety of outputs that I will then layer together in Photoshop. And I'm going to do those each as a separate operation. And so the walkthrough for this is SketchUp 4.4, Styles for Photoshop. And it'll walk you through exactly what I'm going to do live for you. So the first thing is we saved our scene. Done. The next thing is that we want to go to the styles and make some adjustments. So we're going to start here, and I'm going to look under the default tray for something called styles. And I'll make that shown. And then under the default styles subcategory, I'm going to pick the hidden line, which is all white with just white lines. And if I click on it, you'll see that my view changes from one where I have a sky and a ground to being one that's just all white, which is what I want. Furthermore, I don't want the green, red, and blue axes, so I'm going to go up to the View menu, and I'm going to uncheck axes. If I used any guides, I would uncheck guides. I didn't happen to use any here. If I used any section cuts, I would uncheck section cuts as well. Essentially, what I'm getting out of this is the most plain and simple line drawing. That's what I'm seeing here. No color, just black lines on a white backdrop. So at this point, I need to go ahead and export this particular view. So if I go to the File menu and I go to Export, there's going to be a 2D graphic export. That's what I want, 2D graphic. And I'm going to change Let's put this on my flash drive here. Give me a second. Today is 124. All right, and we will call this the Francis Ching Cube House, and this is just plain lines. So I'll add underscore lines to it. And I want to go to the Options button here, and I want to make some adjustments. So this is a JPEG. Under Image Size, I can use View Size, which is what I'm seeing, and I can also choose Better Quality. Now I want to point out one thing. For today's purposes, it really doesn't matter how this comes together. But if we were going to print this on an actual drawing, we generally want 300 pixels per inch of printing. So if I wanted it, say, 10 inches, if I wanted it to fit on an 8.5 by 11, I wanted it to be 10 inches, I would need 3,000 pixels. 300 pixels per inch times 10, you get 3,000 pixels. If I wanted it to be bigger than that, if it needed to show up on a big poster board or something, I need to go even larger. So for today's purposes, I'm going to put in, let's go 3,000. Oops. I have to uncheck the view size, and we'll say 3,000. Oops. Like that. It's restricting the ratio to match what my screen is. So I have 3,000 by 1736. Best quality, I'll say OK. And then it's, again, called Francis Ching Cube House Lines. I'll click on Export. So now it's exported this version. From here, I'm going to move on and do the next one. So here is, as we walk through, there it is. Next one, I'm going to go to the Styles window, and then in the Display Hidden Line mode, I'm going to click Xray. So let me show you this. So again, I'm in Styles. I'm going to go to the Edit tab, and I'm going to turn on, so I'm going to go to Edit. Then it's this, it's called the Faces there, and there's an Xray button. So once again, this by default it's select. I'm still on Hidden Lines, but I'm going to go to the Edit tab. I'm going to pick the next one over right here, which is called Faces, Face Settings, and I'm going to click on the Xray button. So now I'm seeing through my building just a little bit. I want to, again, go through and turn off my axes, my guides, and my section cuts. And now I'm going to export this. So I'll go to File, Export, 2D Graphic. And this is not the lines. This is the Xray. If I click on Options, notice that it saves my same options. So it's 3,000 by 1736 again. A couple things are critical. One, the size has to be exactly the same on each of these exports. And two, the view has to be exactly the same. So notice I haven't changed my view at all. That's why I saved it. If I accidentally orbited, I could click on that Perspective House tab and come right back to this view. Each time we do it, we have to have the same exact view on these exports. So I've done the Xray mode. The next one that I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on just the guides. Now, I didn't use any guides, but if you did, you would turn on just the guides and show that. I'm going to skip it because I didn't use any guides, so it doesn't do any good to turn those on. So we'll move on to the shadows, the sun and the shadows. And so I'm going to go back under my styles here. I'm going to go back to my basic hidden line style. And on the right side here, there's also a drawer for shadows. And what SketchUp has in it, and you probably have experienced this before, is the ability to pick a day and a time and to actually cause some shadows to happen. So I'm going to go to the View menu here. I'm going to check the box for shadows, which causes my shadows to show up. And then I can use these sliders to change the time of day and or the time of year. So what I'll do is I'll pick one that looks interesting to me. We'll say this one. But now when I export, I really don't want all of those white lines or all of the black lines to come with it. So I'll go through and once again turn off the section cuts, the axes, and the guides. Those are all off. But I'm also going to go to the Edit tab of my Styles window here. And here I'm going to go to this first option, which is Edge Settings. And I'm going to uncheck edges. If profiles was checked, you would uncheck profiles as well. And you see what I'm left with is no actual lines, just shadows. And that's what I want. So this is shadows only. I'll go to the File, Export 2D Graphic, once again. And this one is now going to be called Shadows. And I'll go ahead and click on Export. So I've gone through and I have the lines version, I have the Xray version, and I have the shadows version. Now from here, it starts to be a little bit more about style. And so one of the styles that I've used before is pen gray. The other one that works kind of well is airbrush with endpoints. It's just for practice. I've gone through, I've tried a variety of different ones, and those two seem to work well. If I go to my styles window and I go to select, instead of in the default styles, I'm going to choose sketchy edges. And you can look through, this is airbrush with endpoints. It's a little bit stylized. Okay? I could come down here, I could do a variety of other styles. I encourage you to kind of look around and see which one seems like it would work well. Right? You can go from really casual, something like this, to something that's a little more formal. This is the pen gray one that I like. Seems pretty good. It's a little bit faint depending on how large you get. If it's a really big export, the pen gray is kind of faint. What I would encourage you to do is go ahead and try a few options and see what looks best once you get into Photoshop. So again, I want to make sure that I turn off my shadows, my guides, my section cuts, and or my section planes. I have just the lines left. And I'll go to File, Export, 2D Graphic. And this one is the pen gray. And I'll go ahead and export. And then maybe I want to try the airbrush with endpoints, this one. I'll go to File, Export, 2D Graphic. And we'll call this one airbrush. And export. And like I said, this one's pretty easy. You could come in and you could try one of these other ones if you liked it more. OK, so I'll try the watercolor one. I'll go to File, Export, 2D Graphic. And this one was called Watercolor. And I'll click on Export. So once I have all of those files exported, now it's time to go ahead and open up Photoshop again. And I know this is like ancient history for you guys. It was so long ago that we worked on it. But you'll remember this, I hope. So let's open up Photoshop. And with Photoshop open, I'm going to open that first export that I did, which was the lines version. So I'll go to File and then Open. And I'm going to go into today's folder. And the first one was lines. I'll go ahead and open it, and it'll be there in Photoshop. The next thing that I need to do is I need to place the rest of my files on top of this. So I'll go to File, and then Place, and I'll bring in the rest of them. I tend to just go ahead and bring them in all in a row, and then I'll arrange the layers here in just a second. So I'll go ahead and Place, and I'll say OK. Then I'll go to File, Place, and I'll bring in the next one. I'll go to File, Place. And I'll go to File, Place. And I'll go to File, Place. And that's my last one. So I've just dropped them all in. And over here on my Layers menu, sometimes it's helpful to actually rename the layers. So the background layer is still locked. Let's right-click on it and say Layer from Background so it's an editable layer. And this one was Lines. Let's turn these off. This one, in all honesty, this was Airbrush. This one was pen gray. This one was shadows. Now you don't have to rename your layers, but when you get lots and lots of layers, it starts to get confusing. So if you rename your layers, it'll make your life easier down the road. This is watercolor. And This one is Xray. OK, so I have all these labeled. Let's turn them all off except for the lines drawing. And the next one that I'm going to turn on is going to be shadows. So I'll turn shadows on. And obviously, I can't see my line drawing anymore. But remember way back when we talked about blending modes and being able to use blending modes? We're going to do that exact thing. So I'm going to take the shadows layer, and I'm going to change its blending mode to be on multiply. And when I do that, I now have the shadows on top of the line drawing. Furthermore, I can do that for the rest of these layers. So let's take the Xray mode here. Next, we'll turn that one on, and I'll change it to be on multiply. And you can see as I start to layer this up, right, I'm building up my drawing. Let's turn on the airbrush and turn that to multiply. Let's turn on pen gray and turn that to multiply. And then we'll turn on the watercolor, and we'll turn that to multiply. So as I layer these up, I'm starting to get more stylistic control that's not limited to just what SketchUp does. The advantage here is I can choose, oh, you know what, that watercolor seems a little heavy-handed. And in this view, my airbrush seems a little heavy-handed. OK, I like this particular view, but my Xray is a little bit strong. I don't want that to be quite so strong. So let's take the Xray layer and change the opacity down to maybe 20%. So it's a little bit there. It gives a little bit more detail, but it's not over the top. You see how that fine control can help what this looks like? Furthermore, I can say, you know what, these shadows are reading kind of flat. Let me enhance those shadows a little bit. So let me go in and create. I'm going to go to Layer, New Layer, a Dodge and Burn. So remember, on a Dodge and Burn layer, the mode was set to Overlay. And we check the box for Fill with the 50% gray. And I'll say OK. This was, again, written out on the course website. If you went to, under Tutorials, you went to Photoshop, Dodge and Burn 1.5. This would walk you through how to do that. So here I am on the Dodge and Burn layer. I want the Dodge and Burn to apply only to the shadows, not to everything. So with the Dodge and Burn selected, I'm going to press Control-Alt-G to tie the Dodge and Burn layer just to the shadows layer. There's no real other way of doing that. It's just the key command you'll have to memorize. And then I can come over here to the Dodge and Burns. We'll start with the Burn. And I can selectively darken up some of the shadows. So under here, it would be a little bit darker. Right? Remember, I can adjust my brush size. I can zoom out a little bit. I can darken up that edge a little bit. Darken those just a little bit. So it's about what looks right to you. Okay, obviously I'm overdoing it a little bit. Remember, I can also switch from the Burn tool to the Dodge tool, and I could soften up the edges of these shadows a little bit on the outer edge if I wanted to. And again, maybe that's too much, but remember, I can kind of play around with it. I could also choose to increase the intensity of the shadows layer by duplicating it. And so what I'm after today, in terms of your product, is to take your drawings, get these exports, put them all into Photoshop, do a little Dodge and Burn on the shadows, and we call it a day. There's a lot more collage work that's coming in Photoshop that isn't there yet, and we'll get to that point. If you want to take it a little bit further, that's fine, but you have about 30 minutes left in class, and I think that's enough time for you to get this done. When you're done, you're going to go to File, Save for Web, and that JPEG that you save is what you'll post. You don't need to post the Photoshop file. Does that make sense? Yeah? All right.